The latest 2023 zombie series The Walking Dead, Dead City has made a stunning debut. No more words, folks. Let's get on board. In the late afternoon, just outside Manhattan at 3 o'clock, Maggie was observing everything within the city through her binoculars. This once bustling and vibrant city now lay in ruins, with towering skyscrapers resembling a post-apocalyptic wasteland. There was no sign of human life, replaced instead by a horde of grotesque zombies. Maggie felt a growing sense of anxiety as she surveyed the scene before her. She picked up the map she carried with her and compared her current location to her destination. Once again sinking into despair, going to the city center on her own seemed like an impossible task. Just then, the low growl of zombies reached Maggie's ears. She quickly hid, fortunate that the approaching zombies hadn't noticed her. However, just as she was about to breathe a sigh of relief, a zombie suddenly grabbed Maggie's leg, pulling her out from her hiding spot. In her moment of peril, Maggie grabbed a nearby pair of binoculars and smashed them against the zombie's head, resolving the immediate crisis. But Maggie didn't stop there, even though the zombie's head had already been thoroughly crushed. Maggie released the pent-up suffering within her in a near frenzy of emotion. This scene easily brought to mind that small forest and that late night. However, amid the sadness, she had to return to reality. Maggie had to continue her journey. After leaving the seaside, Maggie arrived at a roadside motel. After a heartfelt conversation with the bartender, she managed to extract some information. The person she was looking for was inside the motel. Maggie hurried to the door, and at that moment, she heard the sound of someone showering from inside. Maggie gently pushed open the door, revealing a dagger and a familiar bracelet on the table. It seemed she had found the right place. Maggie picked up the dagger and prepared to move forward, but an unexpected event occurred. The bar's gang members suddenly tied Maggie up, mistaking her for a spy from a rival gang. Just as the women were about to attack, Maggie, calm under pressure, used a few quick moves to defuse the situation. Just then, Negan suddenly burst into the bar. The reunion between acquaintances was particularly warm. Negan immediately made his exit, and Maggie quickly followed. As Negan ran further away, Maggie swiftly started the car. However, the people from the bar suddenly appeared, and in the midst of the ensuing struggle, her notebook with the map was accidentally lost. After chasing for a while, Maggie finally found Negan on a nearby farm. They started fighting as soon as they saw each other, but Negan was at a disadvantage. Maggie didn't press the issue with Negan. Instead, she handed him a wanted poster. Seeing the police notice, Negan wasn't surprised at all. In fact, he seemed quite pleased with the picture on it, expressing a desire to keep it as a memento. Maggie was at a loss for words. Negan called over a young girl to help tend to his wounds. Maggie was puzzled, as this wasn't Negan's child. She asked Negan about the whereabouts of his wife and child, but he didn't answer. Instead, he briefly introduced the girl as Ginny and then started asking Maggie about her reasons for seeking him out. Maggie candidly revealed that a few weeks ago, a group of thugs had attacked her camp and kidnapped her son. Hershel, the leader of this group, was a man named the Croat. Upon hearing this, Negan quickly raised his hands in denial. Maggie knew that Negan understood but was pretending not to. She continued, "When they attacked our camp, the Croat made a distinctive whistle. It's a whistle Negan knows all too well." Unable to conceal the truth any longer, Negan admitted that the Croat had indeed been a member of the Saviors in the past, and he was a deranged lunatic. Negan was perplexed as to why Maggie was so sure he could help her. Maggie responded, "Negan doesn't have much of a choice, because if Maggie can find him, so can the police." It seemed there was no other option, so they hit the road together. Negan had to get Ginny settled first. During their rest, Negan told Maggie about a farm where he had sought refuge not too long ago. Ginny and her father had taken care of him there until one day. Her father had gone out in search of supplies and never returned. Ginny found him, but he had turned into a zombie. Witnessing her father become one of the Walking Dead, Ginny had stopped speaking and had since relied on Negan for survival. After hearing this, Maggie fell into deep thought. Soon after, a woman appeared next to her. She was also from the farm, and she usually took good care of the girl. After Negan and Ginny said goodbye to each other, Negan and Maggie set off. What Negan didn't realize was that the Babylonian police, who were looking for him, had already tracked him to the pub. There was no response from the crowd, Pearly went on to say that Negan was a cold-blooded murderer who would be executed under the new Babylonian code. Not just execution, but Negan's heinous acts warranted hanging or beheading. Pearly presented the wanted poster to the woman from the bar again, but she claimed not to have seen Negan. Pearly quickly lost his patience and forced the woman outside into the square, which was now filled with a horde of zombies. It was clear that she could become a late-night snack for the zombies if she didn't cooperate. The woman eventually tells Pearly that Negan did work there, but just earlier today he left with someone else. She had no idea who the person was, only that they drove a blue pickup truck. Pearly released her, seeming to believe what she was saying. However, in the next moment, he abruptly opened the iron gate and informed the woman that anyone who had helped Negan had to die. In an instant, the woman was devoured by the zombies. As they were preparing to leave, Pearly's attention was drawn to a notebook left behind by Maggie. He studied the location noted in the notebook with a pensive expression. Meanwhile, Negan and Maggie had reached the seaside and decided to take a boat out to sea. Just as Negan was moving a gasoline tank, Pearly arrived with his group. The locations mentioned in the notebook provided no clues about Maggie and Negan's whereabouts. It's their last stop. Pelletier gets out and inspects it. Shano, another officer, arrived at a nearby forest. However, when he turned around, he saw the blue pickup truck described by the woman from the bar. Shano was about to call for backup when Maggie appeared and restrained him. By the time Pearly realized what had happened, Maggie had already set sail with the boat, and that's how Negan and Maggie, with their bailiff hostages, crossed the zombie sea and officially stepped into the land of the dead. And what awaits them is an army of tens of thousands of zombies. As soon as they disembarked, they realized something was amiss. All the zombies in the city had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. With no time to ponder this, they needed to find a place to shelter quickly. Negan, however, immediately grabbed Maggie, expressing his desire to have her take care of Ginny once everything was over. The three of them moved cautiously through the city, but an eerie silence prevailed, and the air was thick with a suffocating stench of blood. Shano attempted to flee, but Negan swiftly restrained him.
Desearás que te hubiera arrojado del bote. Si lo vuelves a intentar.
The trio continued their journey towards the smoky skyscraper they had been observing.
¡Por aquí!
Just then, zombies began dropping from the sky one after another, prompting them to seek cover.
Debieron escucharnos.
¿Es en serio? Ahora los errantes caen del...
Unluckily, a store behind them had amassed a large horde of zombies, and the glass doors were about to give way. Maggie signaled to head beneath the scaffolding across the street. More and more zombies descended from above, indicating that the zombies had become aware of their presence. Finally, when all was quiet again, they resumed their journey. The night was proving too perilous for them. While walking, Negan suddenly halted, examining their surroundings. He urgently called out to Maggie, revealing the human-made traps set on the ground. They had no choice but to take a detour. However, they inadvertently reached a dead-end alley. Just then, a car appeared on the road, blaring loud music, and bringing along a swarm of zombies. They hastily found cover, but the zombies seemed to sense their presence and rushed toward them. Besides the zombies, a multitude of flying insects emerged from a nearby garbage bag.
No!
Negan bolted, but the zombies were dangerously close. In the critical moment, gunshots rang out. Shano, realizing that their allies were approaching, shouted for help. Negan, convinced that Shano was a fool, grabbed him and headed for a nearby building. They sought refuge in a clothing factory and decided to split up to find a safe way out. At the same time, Pearly and his companion entered the factory. He knew that Maggie was here and introduced himself as Pearly, a law enforcement officer from New Babylon. He assured Maggie that he was not her enemy. Maggie, however, remained cautious and did not respond to the supposed friendly gesture. Seeing that Pearly was closing in, Negan grabbed Shano, intending to change positions. However, Shano was a moment too slow and was tackled by the zombies from behind. In their moment of peril, Negan stepped in to help, but in the next moment, Shano would never have imagined that he was being taken out by his own teammates. Meanwhile, at the other entrance, the zombies had broken through the gate, and the officer guarding it was instantly overwhelmed by the zombies. Pearly's team was reduced to just him. The gunshot Pearly had fired had given away his position to Maggie, who had now approached him from behind. Maggie was already behind Pearly, and Maggie was about to make her move when Pearly reacted. They grappled with each other, but Maggie was overpowered by Pearly. Pinned to the ground, her concealed weapons and her shoes were of no use in this dire situation. It was an emergency.
Lo necesito, mi hijo. A mi hijo. Para salvar.
When Pearly heard this, he pushed even harder. Maggie reached for her necklace and flung it toward Pearly. Then, she picked up her rifle and struck him unconscious. And then Negan arrived. Looking at Pearly on the ground, Maggie didn't kill him after all. They quickly fled to another warehouse. Negan lit a match to illuminate the dark space, only to discover that there was someone hidden inside. On the other side of the city, Hershel was being held captive in a dark room. The Croat entered, clearly familiar with Hershel. Hershel's reaction surprised the Croat, but the Croat is no slouch. And not enough fear is often not enough firepower. As he picked up an axe and aimed it at Hershel's legs, Hershel's defenses were beginning to crumble. Just as the Croat was about to proceed with his next move, a knocking sound came from outside the door. Outside, a wounded man was making his escape. The Croat was unhurriedly approaching the man. He picked up a pulley system and reached the rooftop. The Croat, however, remained unfazed. In this dead city, such dramatic performances were often required.
Nuevo récord, ¿no? 20 pesos!
Negan and Maggie are surrounded by zombies in the building. A woman has appeared and taken Maggie's supplies, so they have no choice but to follow her. They climb up the dimly lit lift shaft, and if they're not careful, they'll fall to the bottom. Even if they don't die, they're greeted by zombies at the bottom, but despite the risks, they manage to make it through. Upon reaching the rooftop, the woman slid down a cable to the opposite side, signaling for them to follow. Maggie was a bit squeamish.
Después de ti.
Negan slipped through first. As the zombies approached, Maggie grabbed the pulley and prepared to slide across, but then the sound of music suddenly appeared from below. A moment's distraction caused Maggie to lose her grip on the rope and she couldn't make it to the other side. Fortunately, the horde of zombies below was drawn away by the music truck. With a final burst of effort, Maggie successfully reached the other side. At this point, they encountered Esther, who had taken Maggie's belongings. Surprisingly, she didn't flee and instead offered pigeon meat as a trade. It became apparent that Esther wasn't a threat. Negan cautiously asked if she could guide them to their destination, the smoking skyscraper. Though they couldn't understand Esther's language, it was clear that she couldn't help. Esther gestured for them to follow another path, but Maggie remained cautious, suspecting Esther might be affiliated with the Croat. Negan, however, insisted as they had no other options. Zombies and law enforcement officers were trailing them, leaving them no choice but to trust Esther. They follow Esther, but when they reach the lobby, they are suddenly surrounded. But Esther is trying to stop them, and Maggie can see that they're not the Croat's men. Both sides saw room for negotiation. Maggie concocted a lie, claiming they had inadvertently ended up there and intended to gather supplies before leaving peacefully. However, the group was skeptical. Having heard similar excuses before, Tomaso confiscated their weapons and backpacks and then led them to a camp where many survivors were present. They were put in the toilets. Maggie tries to escape. She doesn't trust these people. Negan argued that even if they could escape, it would be a fight to the death. If they're not the Croat, then they have something to offer: manpower and information. Negan knows the rules of post-apocalyptic survival, and then he tells Maggie what happened to the Croat. They had crossed paths before, and the Croat was initially taken in by Negan. Together, they ruled the saviors. Maggie likened them to demons drawn to each other, but Negan countered by explaining how the Croat excelled at reading people, manipulating them like a puppet master. If Negan was the ruler, the Croat was Negan's abuser. However, Negan had rules he followed, and then the Croat's behavior got worse and worse, even going after children. This crossed a line for Negan, and he decided to eliminate the Croat. Otherwise, the saviors would lose all sense of order. However, Negan missed and only knocked off one of the Croat's ears. The Croat had escaped and had been missing ever since, until now. Soon, there was commotion outside. Tomaso transferred them to the main hall, where people were hurriedly clearing their belongings. They learned that a gang of marauders was infiltrating the camp. Tomaso suspected Negan and Maggie were spies. Negan wasted no time and used a concealed pigeon bone spike to attack Tomaso. He had been prepared for a potential crisis from the start, ensuring he wouldn't be defenseless in such a situation. Negan's keen insight and strategic thinking were evident, but in the next moment, Negan released Tomaso, leading to a tentative truce between the two sides. The weapons were returned to them. Maggie suggests they stay put and wait for the Croats. Negan said, at that very moment, the marauders burst into the hall, and a fierce battle was about to erupt. Negan's character development in The Walking Dead has been highly controversial. After Rick slit his throat, Negan completely lost his aura of being the boss. However, he remains true to himself. Always self-aware and adept at manipulating human nature, he wasn't that confused when he chose to fight alongside Maggie. Negan points out the grim reality of their situation, acknowledging that the odds are against them. Still, he offered his help. But can past grudges be reconciled? When they first met the survivor team, Maggie lied about her boat sinking in a storm. The other side can tell if it's real or not at a glance. Negan debated it afterwards.
Un naufragio que apesta a mentira, Maggie.
Debí haber dicho la verdad.
Estamos aquí porque inventaste un cuento sobre poco y ellos también. Así funciona.
Negan has a soft side for children and enjoys communicating with them. He spends time with Judith, helping her with homework, talking about her concerns, and even risking his life to save her in a snowstorm during a crisis. Judith herself acknowledges that Negan understands her. His conflict with the Croat also stems from their differing views on children, as children represent hope in a post-apocalyptic world. Negan, as always, sees through the essence of things. Now, he encounters another young girl. Ginny had been brought back to the hilltop by Maggie's best friend, and everything was still familiar. However, Ginny is feeling very nervous, and even though it's a safe place to be, she's feeling very lost. Ginny had become very dependent on Negan. A few days later, under the cover of darkness, Ginny steals a motorcycle and heads to Manhattan to find Negan. Meanwhile, another person is searching for Negan. Pearly woke up, desperate to retrieve his weapons. However, his comrades had already turned into zombies, lingering around him. Without his weapons, survival in this place seemed impossible. This desperation led him to think of one place, his old home. After escaping the factory in Manhattan, Pearly was able to find his old house. Everything in the house remained eerily familiar. He had a gun, but when he opened the box, it was gone. Pearly looked up at the picture of his family, so happy before the end of time. The figure in the mirror was so familiar. The blood behind the wall hinted at the man's last struggle. Pearly grabbed a sheet to cover the man. Then he grabbed his pistol and prepared to leave. Unexpectedly, the zombies had already gathered at the door, so Pearly could only go down the side stairs. But in the next second, he couldn't break out of the trap until late at night. By now, the zombies below were getting worse and worse. Just then a car comes along. The man in black takes out the zombies and drops Pearly. Pearly's confused. The man in black with the helmet off is none other than the Croat.
Ya estás a salvo. No te apures.
Meanwhile, another group of marauders had infiltrated Negan's camp without discovering his presence. The mob is heading up the stairs. At this point, there's a confrontation between the two sides. Fortunately, Luther and his team are familiar with the building and quickly deal with the thugs, arriving on the rooftop to take stock. But then the thugs came after them, taking Esther hostage. Negan tries to persuade the mob, but the mob kills her. Negan, enraged, immediately subdues the thug. The group is devastated. Esther had become like family to them, with pursuers closing in. They must escape quickly. Negan, however, takes the thug downstairs alone, determined to teach them a lesson.
¿Qué es eso? Oye, quieto ahí, peludo. Son petulantes y tienen...
In the next second, Negan slits the man's throat and cuts his stomach, a moment that scares the mob downstairs. As he taunts them, Negan boldly declares that he's not afraid of any storm. Maggie witnesses this and, afterward, the group takes refuge in a nearby building. Tomaso and Amaya were grateful that Negan had stopped their pursuers. They wanted to return Negan's favor, but they couldn't provide any more supplies. With the mob attacking them, they're running out of supplies. Maggie reveals her true purpose in coming to the area. The Croat has kidnapped her son. Negan's behavior along the way is obvious to Maggie, and she starts to try to believe Negan. Sincerity for sincerity. Maggie gets what she wants, and that's how Maggie, Negan and the survivors formed a team. This is post-apocalyptic Manhattan. A city overrun by hordes of zombies. Survival in this harsh environment is no easy task. With food being a critical concern, Amaya is tapping her antlers to attract the attention of the moose, while her teammates wait for their chance. As the elk approaches, and that's how they get their raw meat meal. After the meal, Maggie and the group began discussing their rescue plan. The Croat's stronghold was located in the city's arena, and he cunningly lured nearby zombies to fortify its defenses. With only one entrance and ample firepower, the Croat's team came and went as they pleased, making it nearly impossible for outsiders to infiltrate. Maggie proposed the idea of using the sewer system, but Amaya strongly opposed it. She explained that during the initial zombie clearing by the military, bodies were transported into the sewers. However, when the situation spiraled out of control, even the military personnel tasked with transporting the bodies turned into zombies. Now, the entire Manhattan sewer system was teeming with zombies, making it even more dangerous than the surface. Maggie was unwilling to give up, leading to a heated debate among the group. The survivors team was divided on how to proceed. Amaya and Tomaso want to help Maggie, but Luther won't resist. Tomaso then presented an alternative plan. He knew of an old train station in the city with tunnels leading directly into the arena. However, they were uncertain of Hershel's exact location. Maggie proposed that Negan lead a team to lure the Croat out of the arena, while another team would sneak in to rescue Hershel. Luther questioned whether Negan could successfully execute this plan. In order to convince the crowd, Maggie tells the story of the Croat and Negan's past. With the Croat's vengeful nature, it's sure to work. Luther's impatience grew, and with increasing discord among the group.
Hijo ya está muerto.
Para que pueda tener a...
Maten.
Negan sensed Luther's animosity, and that's how the crowd dispersed. By this time the Croatian team had returned to the base camp. Pearly had also been captured and was locked in a room. From there, he had a view of the arena's interior, which still retained some elements from before the apocalypse. The Croat entered the room, accompanied by a chef preparing dinner. Soft music played in the background. Pearly was curious about who this man was and how he had control over everything in this place. The Croat seemed to read Pearly's curiosity and revealed that he used to work in alternative energy. When he arrived on this island, he seized the most critical natural resource, the massive number of bodies in the city's sewer system. The decomposition of these bodies produced methane, which could be compressed into a liquid fuel due to the weak forces between methane molecules. The Croat had firmly established control over both the energy source and the people in the area. He wanted to know Pearly's purpose for being there and assured him that they could play together as long as he didn't pose a threat. Pearly remained vigilant and refused to speak. The Croat didn't care, just as he reached for the cover to begin his meal. He noticed that a portion of the meat had already begun to rot. Rotten meat could harbor various bacteria, and in a post-apocalyptic world with limited medical resources, consuming it could be deadly. The chef, puzzled by the situation, attempted to explain, but the Croat abruptly cut him off. He instructed the chef not to make excuses. He then picks up the key to the Pearly handcuffs and goes to the man, signaling him to open his mouth. The chef complied. Then he told the chef to swallow the key, and the chef didn't dare to resist. But in the next moment, the Croat did this to get Pearly to give in, but Pearly still wouldn't talk. The Croat brought him to the arena. Then, he picked up a mask, seemingly intending to intimidate Pearly. The device was filled with swamp gas, and this was Pearly's last chance. Still, Pearly remained silent. The Croat forced Pearly to inhale large quantities of methane, and Pearly's fitness was severely reduced. His brain was deprived of oxygen, and he had difficulty breathing. When Pearly eventually regained his composure, he realized that he had been locked inside a combat cage, surrounded by an audience that was unusually excited. Soon enough, a zombie was brought into the arena. Due to the massive amount of swamp gas forcibly administered into Pearly's system, his physical abilities had severely deteriorated. His survival instinct forced him into action. Pearly delivered a powerful kick to a nearby zombie, lacking any weapons, and waited for an opportune moment. Fortunately, the zombies were not particularly agile, and Pearly managed to grab one by the neck with the handcuffs. He held on tight until he was able to decapitate the zombie, releasing it only after its head had rolled away. This gruesome act was intended to impress the Croat. However, The spectators outside the cage were unimpressed and began hurling bottles at Pearly. It was evident that these people were merely seeking the thrill of watching zombies devour a human. Seeing the Croat take no action, Pearly bent down to pick up a shard of glass from the ground. He then proceeded to cut open the zombie's belly because the key to his handcuffs was still inside the chef's stomach. Unfortunately, just as he managed to free himself from the handcuffs, several more zombies were released into the cage. Pearly attempted to escape, but the exit was firmly locked. In desperation, he had no choice but to remove his own boot and use it as a makeshift weapon. So Pearly successfully resolved the crisis. However, he still exposed his weakness. When he was choosing his shoes, the Croat realized that Pearly was very concerned about his left boot. Indeed, there was a letter hidden in the boot, a letter left by Pearly's family before they died. Every time the Croat reads a sentence, Pearly's heart aches. Failure to protect his loved ones made Pearly feel guilty every day of his life. Finally, Pearly's psychological defenses crumbled, and he began confessing everything about his journey from New Babylon to this place. Upon hearing Negan's name, the Croat seemed contemplative. At the same time, another individual was also searching for Negan. Ginny had slipped away from the hilltop and had scoured the coastline for any signs of a boat. With her motorcycle out of fuel, she was feeling lost when she noticed a suitcase by the roadside. And with that, Ginny paddled her suitcase to Dead City. Everything ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, and though Ginny felt some fear, she pressed forward with determination. She had learned valuable skills from Negan during their time together. As Ginny maneuvered through the streets, she was caught off guard when a zombie suddenly tackled her. Thankfully, the zombie's leg was pinned under a garbage bin, rendering it immobile. Ginny managed to break free, but she was distracted by a dinosaur toy lying nearby, triggering memories of her past. This particular toy had been Ginny's only possession and had nearly cost her life in the past. It was Negan's timely appearance that saved her. They had depended on each other until Maggie came into the picture. When they were separated, Ginny asked Negan to take the dinosaur with him. It was the most important thing to her. She hoped that Negan would return safely with it. However, Negan had now disappeared. Just as Ginny was about to go up, a survivor came along and decisively took care of the zombies. Intrigued by the dinosaur toy, the survivor casually placed it in their bag and continued on their way. Ginny sneaked up behind her. It didn't take long for the survivor to arrive at her camp, and it turned out that she was a friend of Amaya's who had been in the city looking for usable supplies. While taking inventory, Maggie recognizes Ginny's dinosaur toy. Without hesitation, the survivor gave it to Maggie. Unbeknownst to Maggie, Ginny had followed the survivors all the way here, and was currently watching the camp's movements from the sidelines. Meanwhile, Negan was busy preparing for the next day's plan, carefully selecting a suitable weapon. Just then, Luther approached. Observing the look on Luther's face, Negan signaled that they were all in the same boat now, but Luther pulls out his warrant. Luther didn't trust the two of them and found out the truth when he went through their backpacks. The warrant clearly states that Negan is antisocial and has a tendency towards extreme violence. Luther advised them to leave immediately and not lead their people to their deaths. Negan, however, had his reasons for staying. The two are at odds with each other, and it's clear that there has to be an outcome today.
De acuerdo.
In the next moment, Negan's hands were once again stained with the blood of the living. Luther's death didn't disrupt the original plan, and the group was preparing for their operation that night. While taking a break, Maggie noticed the injury on Negan's hand. Unaware of what had happened the previous night, Negan voluntarily explained that it was just an old injury, but Maggie didn't pay much attention. It wasn't until she saw Luther's beeswax that Negan wanted to tell Maggie the truth. However, at that moment, Maggie wasn't interested in Negan's explanation. She just wanted to rescue her son as quickly as possible. Apparently Maggie had already accepted Negan's change of heart, and he must have had his reasons for doing so. As the sky gradually darkened, Dead City was about to be shrouded in darkness. Maggie's team got ready and quickly made their way to the station tunnel. Tomaso led the way with a flashlight, and the path was almost filled with zombies. They cautiously moved through without disturbing the zombies. The journey was relatively smooth. Soon, the team reached the room in the arena. Tomaso was familiar with the surroundings. The Croat had turned the room into a cell. They opened the room to check Hershel's whereabouts, but it was empty. With blood stains all over, the eerie silence of the cell sent shivers down their spines. Maggie had a foreboding feeling, and she quickly examined everything, until she came to the last room, where the child in the chair had obviously been killed. The resemblance to Hershel is so striking that Maggie finds it hard to accept. Negan approached to check, and fortunately, it was a false alarm. The dead child was not Hershel. Maggie's heart was finally at ease, seeing that the cell was abandoned. The team had to come up with a new plan. Negan lures the Croat out first to finish him off, then figures out how to find Hershel. They wasted no time. The Croat was conducting routine checks in the control room, where he could direct the music cars in the city to guide the zombies along a predetermined path. However, at that moment, a familiar sound reached his ears. The Croat knew exactly who it was. Hearing the whistle, he chased after the sound like a man possessed. Meanwhile, Maggie had successfully reached the garage, preparing to drive and assist Negan. Together, they had a better chance against the Croat. However, just as Maggie was about to start the car, Ginny's figure appeared nearby. Ginny had been following the team all along, and Maggie quickly got out of the car to chase after her. And by now the Croatian had chased Negan to the garage. Negan searched for Maggie everywhere but couldn't find her. It wasn't until Negan walked near the car that he noticed Maggie's weapon. Could something have happened to her? So, Negan quickly took cover inside the car. On the other side, Maggie had finally caught up with Ginny. Before she could ask the reason, the survivor team from the side came running over. Amaya said she didn't find anyone here. Clearly something's not right. Before they could react, elegant music started playing unexpectedly. What shocked them even more was that candles in the corner had been quietly lit. Beneath the candles was a whole barrel of methane fuel. A massive explosion followed shortly. Soon, a large number of zombies poured in from the entrance, and the number was so large that they had to retreat. However, the Croat had already blown up all the exits of the arena. The survivor team knew that every exit they knew of was now filled with zombies. To escape, they had no choice but to fight to the end. This is a deadly showdown. In the octagonal cage, the survivor team is now surrounded by a massive horde of zombies. Their only way out is to fight to the bitter end. However, the number of zombies is simply overwhelming, and one survivor after another falls victim to the gruesome attacks of the zombies. Their situation is dire. At this moment, Negan is cowering inside the car, trembling. The Croat hasn't detected Negan's presence. Zombies from outside have also flooded into the arena. According to the original plan, the Croat has to evacuate all personnel. However, he still can't come to terms with it. Back when he was with the Saviors, he admired Negan so much. Negan had a soft spot and wouldn't harm children. On one mission, a girl was taken captive, and Negan believed she posed no threat to the Saviors, so he ordered the Croat to let her go. However, the Croats tortured her and forced her to give information until she died. Simon, knowing Negan's character, confronted the Croat about it. The Croat thought Negan would understand him, but the look on Negan's face said it all. Eventually, Negan and the Croat had a complete falling out. In order to find Negan, the Croat left 2 of his men behind. Knowing that Negan was in the arena, seeing that several individuals were now separated, Negan quickly created a commotion. The Croat, upon seeing Negan, was excited beyond measure and immediately called back his men to pursue him. Meanwhile, the situation for the survivor team was grim. There were too many zombies, and after killing one, there were still countless more. We were exhausted. As they watched their teammates fall, there was nothing they could do to help. Even Tomaso was engulfed by the zombie horde. Maggie was killing one zombie after another, and she even started hallucinating, so they hurriedly retreated to the cage to rest for a while. It didn't take long for the zombies to swarm outside. This is not the way to go. Maggie came up with a plan. Maggie, in her haste, told the crowd to unload the cushion next to her and hold it in their hands as a shield. They huddled closely together, forming a makeshift defensive formation. This strategy worked, allowing them to fight their way to the nearest exit. Meanwhile, Tomaso managed to break free from the zombie horde. They finally escaped the arena, but there were only 4 of them left. They arrived at a room filled with fuel, but zombies were closing in from outside. They hastily pushed heavy objects in front of the door to block it. They both knew it wouldn't last long. Maggie noticed a sign on the wall indicating an exit to the sewer, and it seemed like their only option. Amaya disagrees, as the sewers are full of zombies and the air inside is unbreathable. Tomaso knew they were at a dead end, and the sewer was their only choice, and so they entered a place even more terrifying than the ground. On the other hand, the Croat chased Negan to the roof of the building. He looked down the hall and the zombies had dispersed. The Croat knew Negan was nearby, so he started taunting him. Sure enough,
Hermano. Negan. Hurrah!
the Croat wanted to reminisce with Negan. He brings up Negan's scar, asks about Lucille's whereabouts. He even says that he should have brought reinforcements during the big battle with Rick's group. If it hadn't been for Simon's foolish actions in wiping out the scavengers, the saviors wouldn't have suffered such a defeat. The Croat continued, saying that even if Negan had cut off one of his ears, they could have reconciled and built a new kingdom together in Manhattan. Seeing Negan's impassive response to his passionate speech, the Croat remained excited. He had someone bring Pearly over, thinking this was Negan's style. He thinks Pearly is tracking Negan, and Negan's here to take out Pearly. However, the Croat was wrong. Negan had a different agenda.
Solo,
Esto va a ser difícil.
dame al niño.
The Croat wasn't happy about it, but he won't give up. He still wants to fight alongside Negan. To show sincerity, he pushed Pearly off the high platform. However, Negan's subsequent actions took him by surprise.
¿Qué estás haciendo? Negan.
Negan firmly held onto Pearly, a stark departure from his previous character, the notorious Negan. Saving a life? The Croat was extremely surprised, so he angrily lunged forward with a shot.
¡Vayan ahora!
Pearly is a tough guy too, and pulls the hook out of his leg. In this way, they helped each other and managed to escape the arena. In the next episode, we'll witness the season's climax. We'll see you next time. The Walking Dead, Dead City introduces a new breed of mutated zombies, featuring 3 heads and 6 arms, which are incredibly grotesque. The tunnels are filled with the stench of decay and piles of zombies, making it nauseating to be there. Tip: watch it during your meal time. Without further ado, the story picks up right where the previous episode left off. Maggie's team suffered heavy casualties during the battle at the Coliseum. They are forced to venture into the sewers of Manhattan, which are littered with bodies and filled with methane gas. The noxious smell makes it unbearable, causing headaches and nausea. They must escape quickly. Tomaso leads the way, and the others follow closely. Soon, they notice something unusual nearby. Tomaso investigates and discovers a pile of human fat. At that moment, Ginny rushes to climb up the pile of fat. Maggie stops her. Maggie knew Ginny was trying to climb up to find Negan, but the access holes are already closed. This kind of risky behavior will put the team in danger. Ginny didn't say anything as the group moved on. In another room, Tomaso finds 2 oxygen tanks that only the members of the Thugs gang could have brought there. Not caring too much, they hurriedly grabbed their oxygen tanks to breathe. The smell of the zombies here was simply too nauseating. Amaya suggests giving 1 tank to Ginny because she's younger, and the others take turns with the remaining tank. However, when Tomaso hands Maggie the oxygen tank, she refuses. Maggie looks at Tomaso in silence. Amaya wonders why the mission was kept so secret and how the Croat knew their plans. Tomaso suspects Luther betrayed them, as he couldn't be found when they left. Maggie then reveals that Tomaso was the one who betrayed them. Tomaso was very familiar with the escape route, and even designed the retreat through the sewers in advance. He was the one who snitched on this operation. Hearing this, Tomaso was a bit angry, and he argued strongly.
Estás paranoica, ¿sabes?
¿Por qué te quitaste la mochila?
No confías en nadie.
It turns out that the oxygen cylinder Tomaso found when he came here was not a chance find, but something he had put in his backpack beforehand. Amaya finds it hard to accept that Tomaso has always been her best friend. Tomaso tries to explain that he did all this for Amaya and that he wants to keep them safe in the future. Amaya was disappointed that the person she trusted the most would betray the team and sacrifice so many of her companions for the sake of the so-called good things. After that, Amaya left sadly, seeing that their lies have been exposed. Tomaso and Maggie look at each other angrily. Maggie thought Tomaso wanted to fight. However, Tomaso did not make any move. Despite the rift, they must focus on escaping. They continued their journey, but unfortunately, the path ahead was blocked by zombies. Maggie and the 3 of them stopped for a short break, watching Tomaso clearing the zombies in front of them. They wondered what his intentions were. Maggie wanted to approach Tomaso to inquire, but the methane's effects made her dizzy and disoriented. Tomaso offered her an oxygen tank, but Maggie still refused. During this break, Tomaso finally revealed the truth. Initially, Tomaso had been captured by the Croat and managed to escape the arena through his own strength. However, Just as he was about to reach the exit, the Croat captured him again. In exchange for his life, Tomaso had to reveal the hiding place of the survivors, allowing him to be reunited with Amaya. The Croat promised him a boat and a comfortable dwelling on the mainland, complete with a clean kitchen and a cozy bedroom. The condition was that he had to lead everyone to the arena. Tomaso was tired of the constant struggle for survival and yearned for a peaceful life with Amaya, which led him to make this choice. However, for the sake of the person he loved, Tomaso felt compelled to make this choice. Like Maggie said before, safety at all costs. And this is what he got. Hearing Tomaso's statement, Maggie's heart rippled. Just then, Amaya's cries for help echoed through the tunnel, and Tomaso rushed to her aid. The zombies on the floor suddenly tripped Tomaso. Maggie tried to intervene, but it was too late. By the time she finished with the zombies, Amaya was no longer alive. On the other side, Tomaso's situation was no better. Despite his fighting prowess, he couldn't withstand the sudden zombie attack, and his neck had been bitten.
No.
Todo lo fastidié, Amaya. Amaya.
The team was reduced to just Maggie and Ginny. They pressed on, and Maggie attempted to persuade Ginny to return to the hilltop. Maggie knew that if Negan knew Ginny was here, Negan wouldn't hesitate to take Ginny out of Manhattan. Then her plan to save her son would go down the drain. Ginny nodded and didn't say anything. A little while later they came across a pile of zombies, the methane emanating extra strongly due to the sheer number of them. They managed to get over the pile of bodies, but Maggie gets one of her feet stuck in the body. At that moment, the low roar of the zombies came over. Realizing the danger, Maggie urged Ginny to run while she fought the zombies alone. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't free her trapped leg. Suddenly, the zombies stood up, and Maggie was knocked down. With quick thinking, Maggie pulled out her weapon and stabbed a zombie in the head. However, the zombie's belly split open, revealing 2 more heads, creating a disgusting sight. Luckily, Maggie is a good fighter, and solved several heads of zombies one by one. By the time the crisis was over, Maggie was exhausted. She climbed the stairs, calling out Ginny's name, wanting to catch up with her, but the letters Ginny had left on the pipe left Maggie dumbfounded. Ginny used the words to accuse Maggie of being a fraud. Maggie had told her that the Hilltop's food had been stolen by the Croat, but Ginny had secretly seen the grain stored in the Hilltop's barn. She also realized that their Manhattan journey was a deception. Maggie hadn't come to seek Negan's help to rescue her son. Instead, she had brought Negan here to exchange him for her own child. Everything became clear to Ginny. Ginny hadn't come impulsively to find Negan, she had come to save him. It's hard to imagine a police setting in a post-apocalyptic world of zombies, due to Negan's killing of the sheriff and his 4 deputies. The new Babylon law enforcement officers were determined to apprehend Negan and bring him to justice. However, the dangers in Manhattan were numerous, and before they could capture Negan, only Pearly remained from the law enforcement team. Ironically, at a critical moment, Negan ended up saving Pearly's life. After escaping the arena, they sought refuge in a store. Pearly, however, didn't appreciate Negan's assistance. Despite Negan having saved him, it didn't absolve him of his crimes. Negan explained that the sheriff had harmed and insulted his wife, and any man would have made the same choice. Pearly didn't respond but proceeded to confiscate Negan's weapons, making it clear that Negan was now his prisoner. They came out into the street and Pearly was going to go to the docks to take Negan back to New Babylon. Negan reminds him that the boat is damaged.
¿No crees que es caminar a lo estúpido? Muelles sin botes? Como ya dije, los botes se hundieron.
Negan, for all his talk, has a remarkable intelligence. Pearly knew about the foam flotation blocks at the docks that they could use for drifting. Negan quickly deduced that Pearly was a local resident based on this information. Just then, a horde of zombies surrounded them, and the numbers were overwhelming. They quickened their pace, but the zombies had already encircled them, reaching out with their rotting hands. Negan, always valuing his leather jacket and adhering to his philosophy of run if you can, finally spotted an exit. They locked the door behind them and entered a large building that resembled a warehouse. Walking along the side of the iron frame attracted the attention of the 2 men. Tied to the dolls looked bizarre field. Looked at the zombies outside the door. Negan thought for a moment. Then the 2 of them walked on. They entered another room where a zombie was strapped to a chair with its hands tied to the armrests, and a large axe was embedded in its skull. Recalling the puppet, Negan marveled at the sheer madness of the person responsible for these gruesome displays. At this moment, Negan smelled a hint of danger, then the 2 of them walked out. However, when Pearly wasn't paying attention, Negan seized the opportunity to grab a zombie he had just discovered and flung it at Pearly, clearly trying to get rid of him. Unfortunately, the exit downstairs had been sealed with wooden boards, and Pearly, after dealing with the zombies, caught up to he. By then, Pearly's wound had worsened, and without Negan, he would be left to die. Negan engaged Pearly in a calm conversation. Negan was willing to help him, as long as he agreed to let go of the damned police procedures of apprehending criminals. After all, it was the end of the world. Pearly, however, refused Negan's offer, and Negan couldn't comprehend his stubbornness. Nevertheless, Negan assisted Pearly and helped him leave the area. As they watched the daylight fade, the two of them arrived at a school bus. Negan pried open the door, and the inside appeared relatively safe. Negan then located a first aid kit, showcasing his survival skills. As a former physical education teacher, he knew that school buses were equipped with first aid supplies. Pearly became increasingly puzzled about why Negan had decided to save him. Negan explained that if Pearly died, New Babylon would pin the blame on him, sending more police after him. It was clear that Negan had formed a favorable impression of Pearly. Compared to the harmony on the school bus, the Croat is a bit depressed, and angry enough to bump into passing zombies. The Croat thought he could talk Negan into joining him, but Negan didn't take him seriously. The Croat entered a theater where a group of people were reveling in the apocalypse. It turned out to be the new base of the Violencia gang. The Croat reached a passageway where a woman emerged.
Hey, lady.
Fuera de mi camino, perro.
Once again, the Croat gets the short end of the stick, and no one takes him seriously. Then, a subtle detail emerged. The Croat politely knocked on a door, indicating that the people inside held a higher status than he did. The Croat reported his work, stating that he had cleared out the survivor groups, and Negan was now on the island. However, the woman only cared about results and didn't want to hear about the process. Failure to bring Negan here is a problem with the Croat's abilities. The Croat is afraid to say anything. Luckily, when he pulled out his marshal's badge, the women showed a lot of interest. She was the true ruler of the island. In the post-apocalyptic world, greed prevailed. The mainland's law enforcement agencies would undoubtedly attempt to breach their hard-earned kingdom if they discovered their existence. The Croat couldn't allow that to happen. The Croat then prepared to leave, but the woman extended her hand. The Croat understood, and at that moment he was like an obedient child. On the other side, Ginny had successfully escaped the sewer, and it was now late at night. She hesitated for a moment, then fired a flare gun into the sky, casting a red glow over the lifeless city. Whether it was Negan in the vehicle or Maggie, who had just escaped, everyone was captivated by the crimson light. All the mysteries would remain for the next episode. We'll see you next time. The Walking Dead, Dead City Season 1 Finale Update. Not a lot of ups and downs, but more like an extended trailer. Hershel was rescued, but that was just the beginning. The story picks up right after the previous episode. Ginny's signal flare streaks across the night sky, prompting Negan and Pearly to quickly exit their vehicle and assess the situation. Negan, believing it to be Maggie's signal, starts searching for Maggie. However, Ginny approaches from the side. Upon seeing Negan, Ginny breaks into a long-lost smile. Negan rushes forward and embraces Ginny. Just as Negan is about to inquire about the situation, Maggie suddenly arrives. Negan asked Maggie why she didn't tell him Ginny was coming to Manhattan. Maggie, however, disguises the truth, claiming she randomly encountered Ginny in the arena. Maggie keeps talking, not giving Ginny and Negan a chance to communicate. Negan suspects that Maggie is hiding something. At this moment, the growling of nearby zombies interrupts them, and they must retreat quickly. Negan angrily scolds Ginny, as he can't protect Ginny while helping Maggie. Everything has been planned. Negan thought Ginny was being very capricious this time. Ginny wants to explain, but when she looks at Maggie, she chooses to remain silent once again. At this point, Pearly offers to take Ginny away from Manhattan. Negan just needs to do what he needs to do. Ginny heard and hugged Negan. She didn't want to go. Negan reassures Ginny that Pearly is a good person who will ensure her safe return to the mainland. Seeing Negan's determination, Ginny is desperate and speaks up, wanting Negan to leave with her.
Todos estos meses y ahora quieres charlar.
Yo quiero que...
Seeing Ginny's determination, Negan reveals the truth from years ago. It turns out Negan lied about being wanted for robbing a wagon. In reality, he killed 5 people, including Ginny's father. and he kept Ginny with him because he knew she had no remaining family.
Que sabía que no tenías a nadie. La deuda que tenía que pagar.
Upon hearing the truth, Ginny is filled with disappointment and anger and promptly leaves with Pearly. Under the cover of night, they make their way to the docks. Pearly ties phone blocks together, and the two of them leave the dead city this way. When daylight comes, Pearly brings Ginny to the newly established The Hilltop. Maggie's friends are waiting for Ginny, seeing the clothes left in the back seat. Pearly wants to remind Ginny, but Ginny glances at Negan's shirt and enters the gate without looking back. Pearly then drove the car on his way home. He was once again at the state line in New Babylon. Pearly looks at the hanging zombie nearby, feeling a mix of emotions. In the office, he begins to report his work. Pearly tells the governor that he has taken care of Negan. His colleagues all cheer, relieved that the troublemaker is finally dealt with. However, the governor has other plans.
Digo que hubiera estado bien exponerlo.
She signals for Pearly to take a cigar and relax. Politely, Pearly declines the governor's offer. The governor is a little pissed off that her men have to obey her orders. She smiled and questioned Pearly's 3 children with a threatening tone in her voice. Reluctantly, Pearly takes the cigar the governor offers. Then, the governor launches into a lengthy discourse, educating Pearly about the formation of methanol and ethanol. Once finished, she reveals her greed. In this post-apocalyptic world, resources are everything. It's only now that Pearly realizes a resource war is about to begin. On the other side, after Ginny's departure, Maggie and Negan are on guard duty in the building. They are searching for signs of the Croat. A short while later, a sports car came speeding by, and they rushed to the roof to observe the movement. Seeing the smoking building in the distance, they quickly pinpoint their destination. Maggie and Negan set off, traveling quickly through the city. After a long walk, they finally arrived at the place where the smoke was coming from. Before arriving in Manhattan, Maggie mentioned that this place seemed suspicious. Negan laughed and said Maggie's judgment was spot on. Unbeknownst to Negan, this place is where Maggie and the Croat make their trades. However, the conversation that follows suggests that Negan has already figured out Maggie's ulterior motives.
No lo sé, tal vez sabía que...
Estuviste en las cloacas con Ginny.
Solo quería explicar.
Negan's expression suddenly turns menacing. In the next moment, they engage in a fierce fight. And this time, Negan is not holding back for Maggie. After tossing Maggie aside, Negan tries to flee, but there are already many zombies gathering outside. Maggie catches up, and Negan is forced to search for an escape route through the steel pipes. But Maggie doesn't stop chasing her. With no way out, Negan attempts to negotiate, stating there's no need for things to turn so sour. Maggie, who is desperate to save her son, can't hear it, and there's no way she's going to give up when she's so close to succeeding. This time, Maggie is ruthless. However, Negan backed down at every turn. Finally, Maggie thrusts a knife into Negan's shoulder, and Negan kicks Maggie away. Negan, displaying his toughness, swiftly pulled the dagger out from his shoulder. Without hesitation, he leaped off the platform. Maggie seems to want to resist. Negan directly pressed the dagger against her neck. Maggie gave in for a while. Negan then voiced his conjecture. The Croat hadn't actually taken the Hilltop's food. Instead, he had taken Maggie's son as collateral, with Negan himself as the bargaining chip. While Negan had correctly deduced the answer, he couldn't fathom the Croat's motive for doing so. Negan tried to convince Maggie that things didn't have to be this confrontational. Together, they could be unstoppable and easily rescue his son. Maggie knew this but couldn't get past the hurdle. She can't get Glenn out of her mind.
Que no importan las excusas que te di o cuántas veces me haya disculpado. No puedes superarlo. Y no debería.
Soon, the Croat arrived with his gang of thugs. Maggie picks up the dagger on the floor, and with that Negan is subdued. Upstairs, the Croat reveled in his success. On the way back, the Croat said they had initially gone to the Savior's headquarters to find Negan, but it had long been abandoned. They had spent months searching until they received information about 4 sheriffs and gathered intelligence about Maggie. Maggie had a fatal weakness, Hershel. Everything had fallen into place. Even the Croat hadn't anticipated that Maggie would actually complete the mission. They arrived at an abandoned building, which seemed to be the location where Hershel was being held. Negan had only one request, that Maggie take care of Ginny. Before Maggie could answer, Hershel was taken out. The Croat kept his promise, allowing Maggie to leave with her child. Negan, too, gave up without resistance, walking inside. The Croat provided a wooden boat for Maggie and her son, allowing them to smoothly depart from Manhattan. The dust had settled. Maggie was deeply concerned about her son. She asked Hershel if he was hungry and whether the Croat had mistreated him. She even prepared a new baseball cap for him, but Hershel didn't appreciate his mother's concern. He blamed Maggie. He said Maggie had lived her life in vengeance. He accused her of being fixated on Negan and all that he had done. Hershel blames his mother for never paying attention to him. Maggie attempted to explain, but Hershel suggested that none of it mattered anymore. Meanwhile, the Croat and Negan reminisced about their past, with the Croat admiring Negan's leadership charisma. He thanked Negan for providing him with a stage to shine on. Their falling out was something the Croat deeply regretted. It took years for the Croat to realize that.
Me llevó mucho tiempo poder entender lo que pasó. Sí, no debía haber matado a la niña.
The Croat wanted to continue to fight alongside Negan, and he would never disobey him again. The two then went to the thugs' base. Dama had mentioned that once they fully controlled the island, conflicts among civilizations were inevitable. The Croat told Dama all about Negan's past. Dama said that Negan was the one person the team needed, and that's why the Croat was looking for Negan. The Croat didn't want to kill Negan to avenge his own ear, but wanted Negan to continue to lead him to glory. After entering the room, the Croat excitedly introduced Negan to Dama. However, Dama didn't pay him much attention and wanted to spend some time alone with Negan. The Croat obediently left the room. Dama had this to say about the Croat.
Carajo.
She was delighted to meet Negan and was grateful he wasn't merely a figment of the Croat's imagination. She was well aware of Negan's actions on the island, including the incident in the bank where he cut open one of Dama's men. This revelation left her both shocked and in awe. Dama offered Negan a glass of brandy, but he declined, stating he preferred gin. Dama didn't mind. She appreciated Negan's kingpin demeanor. Then, Dama produced a sheriff's badge and handed it to Negan. Negan thought she was afraid of the police, but Dama clarified that she was more concerned about the forces behind them. Wherever there were abundant natural resources, these forces would swoop in like vultures.
La isla necesita valentía, carisma. Ahora más que nunca, alguien con ese especial, diríamos.
Dama's comment made Negan very happy, and isn't it just himself? Negan became intrigued, took a seat on the couch, and asked Dama why she believed he would help her. Dama explained that north of Manhattan's Harlem neighborhood, there was another group of people. She needed Negan to bring them under the same rule. Together, they would be unbeatable, and Negan would once again have everything under his thumb. Dama then handed Negan a key. After receiving the key, Dama presented a box to Negan, gesturing for him to open it. Though somewhat hesitant, Negan eventually opened the box and saw Hershel's severed toe. Dama knew Negan's character. Negan would take responsibility for the boy whose family he destroyed. Furthermore, Hershel had been in this very room, and he had felt safer with Dama than with his own mother. Maggie stared in shock at the portrait of the woman before her. She had never truly understood her own son. Dama also used this as an invitation to Negan.
Quedé con un pedazo de él. Eventualmente lo dejé ir a cambio de... Y siempre puedo volver. Haz que dure. Mucho que planear.
This was how the first season's story concluded. The Walking Dead protagonist group's first spin-off ends. As to whether or not Negan will rule Dead City next, will Hershel go dark? Will Maggie and Negan be able to team up again? Whether The Walking Dead, Dead City Season 1 was merely a pilot run is something we are all left in the dark about. This is just the beginning. With the release of the spin-off, The Walking Dead franchise's popularity has soared once more. All will be left to the judgment of the viewers. We'll see you in the next episode.